to strike that balance between developing the team, dealing with any issues within the team, and of course getting the best out of the individual. I always say when I'm training, this would make a great pub quiz question, wouldn't it? What's the difference between a leader and a manager? This ability to excite people to perhaps go out of their comfort zone, to get them from where they are now to where you want them to go at every level of an organisation. That is key. My name is Trevor Vanstone. I'm an action-centred leadership trainer and I run a company called Perspective HR. We work across England and Wales. I'm joined for these podcasts by my very good friend Jim Hutton, who has worked in the field of leadership for well over 4 decades and can bring an enormous amount of insight to this subject.
Yep, as Trevor said, Jim Hutton. I am a coach and mentor, a military man. I've served in the Royal Navy, the Royal Marine Commandos, and latterly the Royal Australian Navy. I'm over from Australia, supporting my old friend Trevor and his company Perspective HR, talking about leadership and in particular active centered leadership and the role of the leader in getting stuff done and bringing your people with them. So I want to share my experience with Trev and also hear from him on how he's getting the most out of this program. Today we're going to talk about you and your role in action-centered leadership. Can you just give us a bit of history about your connection to this model?
Yes, certainly. I mean, as an introduction, I went through the traditional role that many people have in the world of business and leadership, where you're put in charge because you're technically qualified and then not given any training. I worked in the world of newspaper and magazine publishing and editing for over 20 years. Which is just like any other industry where you have people and resources and you're looking to get outcomes. We had a shed load of training. All of it would sort of tell you who you were and tell you about your character traits, but very little of it actually told you what to do. So when I started doing this job, and I now own and run a employment, HR and leadership training company, which operates across the England and Wales, we were looking for a model to train and develop the people that we work with. And action-centered leadership, which I've worked with for 15 years, is a universal system, a framework that actually puts this role of leadership into context and gives you a system to use to achieve what needs to be done.
Yeah. So, I mean, I first met John Adair back in 1978 when he was teaching action-centered leadership. Have you met John?
I have indeed. I've several times had conversations with him. A very wise individual, huge amount of knowledge, still very active, still very busy writing his books, and I believe he's still the standard of leadership writing.
Yeah, and you know the model is built around the 3 circles of the team, the task, and the individual, and you're imbuing people with knowledge and education on how to perform as a leader against those 3 circles. What is the role of the leader?
Wow, that is a huge question, of course. Probably over the last 15 years, I've trained about 350 leaders, managers, whatever we call them, principally from our client base on this subject. And what I think action-centered leadership brings to this is that it very vividly and graphically puts across the things that a leader needs to do to achieve those 3 elements. And of course, ultimately most people are promoted into a role because they're technically good at something and they are expected to do it well and get a result. So therefore we are generally judged on achieving the task, and it doesn't matter what line of work you're in. If you're running a charity, if you're running a manufacturer, professional services, you have to achieve a task. You have to make sure that you get the outcomes and that your team are delivering. What I think has worked so well with this model and why I think it stood the test of time is that it enables a leader to look at what they're doing and to strike that balance between developing the team, dealing with any issues within the team, and of course getting the best out of the individual. Because the biggest mistake that people make, and I did it exactly the same when I was 23 and put in charges, I've got all these tasks to do, get these newspapers out, I've got to focus on that, I've got to work really hard. And the danger is, of course, that we overlook these other elements. And to some degree, we stick in our comfort zone. This is the bit I can do, I'll work really hard, people will follow me. And of course, as we all know, and the world of work is littered with these stories, leadership is a completely different set of skills.
Yeah. You're on a roll here, Trev, I can tell, but I'm going to pull you back to something you just said earlier on, which was leader or manager or whatever we call them. Do you think there's a difference between a leader and a manager?
I always say when I'm training, this would make a great pub quiz question, wouldn't it? What's the difference between a leader and a manager? The best definition I've ever heard is that a manager makes sure that things are done right, and a leader does the right thing. And I guess the reality is with the size of organisations that we work with, and bear in mind most organisations are SMEs, small organisations, if you are in charge, whatever we call it, you sort of got to be good at both. You've got to know what's required, the standards, the budget, all of the management stuff, getting those things right. Because don't forget, nothing will demoralise a team worse than turning up and we haven't got the resources, or we haven't got the plan or the budget. Something's wrong. But this leadership, this skill, this ability to excite people, to perhaps go out of their comfort zone, to get them from where they are now to where you want them to go at every level of an organisation, that is key. And it's based on things, such as integrity. It's based on moral courage. It's based on dealing with the awkward, difficult things, because we get promoted at work and we think this is fantastic, I've got a pay rise, and then you start having to deal with some fairly tricky subjects, but ultimately we're judged on how we deal with those.
In your experience in industry, why is it people do get promoted?
We've all heard of Peter's Principle. The way the economy seems to be configured is that if you want to get a pay rise and afford the bigger mortgage and everything, you generally end up being put into a role where there is lots of leadership stuff and you have to look after another team and look after other folks. And of course, we instinctively go for the best salesperson, the best engineer, the person who's technically best at what they do.
They're good at what they do.
Good at what they do, but we know, and everyone can tell you this story, and when I start the training course, everyone will give me examples of this, of folks that have struggled with that. Some people have risen to the challenge and done really well, other people have struggled, and I often think that we are making life difficult for these folks. Professor John Adair has said to me in the room that it's actually morally wrong to put someone in a leadership role without the training. He compares it to putting your kids on a school bus with an untrained driver. And I think that's actually quite a stark analogy, and I think it's right.
So the onus is on the company, if you want to promote someone because they're good at their job, to train that leader manager in the skills of leading and managing, such that they can use that deep, masterful knowledge of the job and apply it.
Definitely. And when we talk about the foundations of leadership, we talk about the situational approach, which is based on knowledge. We talk about qualities, which is based on who that person is. And we talk about things like courage and integrity. But action-centered leadership, and if we talk about the three circles and the functions of leadership, is what you do as a leader. And all of this stuff, ultimately, if you think about it, with most organizations, the payroll is going to probably be their biggest cost. Their people, I hate to refer to it as a cost, but it's going to be the biggest point on the accounts. So therefore, it's a false economy not to get the very best out of your people, your teams, and your individuals. So it's good business to do this.
And that's a great segue into, let's call them the functions of a leader. What it is a leader should be focused on in achieving the task, leading the team, and getting the best out of the individuals within that team as they do so.
And again, I think the brilliance of action-centered leadership is that we focus on the functions. Now, these are real tangible things which are not unfamiliar to people, but by talking about action-centered leadership, we bring it into the context of what you have to do. We generally focus on 8 when we're looking at the sort of team leader level, which is anybody that's running a team of people. So let's say 6 or 10 people, and that could be the CEO with, perhaps a senior team. And I always say that the sort of foundation ones in there are clarifying the objective. So we have to be absolutely crystal clear of what is expected, what are the standards, what are we meant to be doing. And I say to all leaders on the course, if there is any doubt in your mind, go upstairs and ask the question. You have that right. And also you have the right to question, well, perhaps because we've always done something a particular way, is that the best way?
See, so, I just want to hold you to that one, Trev, because that actually takes a bit of courage for some people, and that it is entirely dependent on the character of your boss as to whether you have the moral courage to go upstairs and have that conversation. So how important is moral courage in being a leader?
I mentioned it earlier. If you are in a leadership role and you're having to deal with all of the issues at work and looking after your team and excuse me, dealing with perhaps issues with customers and everything else, yes, it is a tough place. Now, you don't have to be demonstrative, you don't have to be angry, but you have to have that quiet confidence and that courage to deal with it. And it's interesting because generally by about this stage on the training course, people are sat there in the room and they're starting to realize actually how big their job is and how many things they have to affect, and just the interaction between all of those different aspects.
And of course, the team expects that sort of behaviour from their leader.
They do. And, we'll come on to one of the functions, which is leading by example. And there's no question, no doubt whatsoever that people are hugely influenced by what they see the leader doing. John Adair speaks of the fact that people take in more information with their eyes and their ears. So how you conduct yourself at work, and this permeates all the way down. It can not just the CEO and the tone that's set at the top of an organisation, but at leadership at every level. It will permeate down, and people will take their lead from it.
Do you, Trev, just cast your mind back through your working life? Can you readily think of what you call an inspirational leader, and tell me what it was about that man or woman that got you out of bed in the morning to go to work?
Wow. To be honest, it was probably somebody outside of work, and it was through a project we got involved in around community theatre, which my daughters and then my wife got involved in. And at the 11th hour, I got dragged into this enormous undertaking of a community theatre play, which was about a Second World War bomber that was true story, shot down in East Devon, and the play was staged in a marquee on the field where all this happened. Very interesting, but obviously I was very busy with work and all the rest of it. Turned up and immediately fell under the thrall of the person who was running this event, who had got 80 strangers together and trusted them to do all sorts of interesting technical things. There was a 16-year-old doing all the tech. There were people, they formed a choir. There's all these people acting and doing things. And I ended up as a shouty air raid warden and was the first voice that people heard when they started. And when I sat back and analysed it, it was purely, no one got paid for this. It was purely the momentum and the joy of doing it. And this guy, you just couldn't let him down. And even though I turned up the day before to see what was going on, I ended up in it. But I've never seen anyone who had the trust and the confidence to pull a whole disparate group of people together to produce something that was incredible. It was one-off. I mean, it was live on the BBC, on Spotlight when it started and all the rest of it. Made hundreds of people watched it. So it was quite an interesting one to see that level of leadership and what can be achieved by generating that energy to move people to do things that they really had no inclination or experience.
So taking that chap as an example, go through your 8 functions and just relate the functions to what you recall now of how
we talked there about setting the objective, we could spend a whole day talking on that one. Well, the objective here was to produce a piece of community theatre which was original. They'd spent 3 years writing this thing. They'd researched it. They'd even found parts of the plane and all the rest of it. They even tracked down the pilot who shot it down. This was some years ago. So the objective was clear. There was an enormous amount of planning, as you can imagine, to pull something like this off with a marquee in a field. Now, planning is a critical skill, and there are all the old jokes about fail to plan, prepare to fail. Or was it Roald Amundsen said that adventure is merely bad planning? Now, as we say to all of our clients, we don't care specifically what system you use, but taking that time to plan, looking at what you've got to achieve, look at the resources you need. Do not overlook, of course, the role of the team and the individuals. How's it going to affect them? Are they going to have to find new skills? Some of the individuals may be uncomfortable. There may be an element of reassurance. And the critical thing, of course, is where you can use the team in planning because they have the knowledge.
And going back to your example, what stood out about the plan to create that play?
I think I was very much the Johnny come lately, and the planning had been going on for 3 years beforehand. And I think what struck me about it was just the sheer complexity of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. All the music, the theatre, it was a promenade performance, people walking around, watching all of the different elements and all of the different aspects, the music.
So the orchestration.
The whole thing, the complexity to pull this thing off. And the fact that, like I say, it was 80 people that had never done anything like this before, and were all galvanised into doing it. And I've never seen anything where there was such a momentum that whatever happened, it was going to succeed.
And what other functions come into play in your role as a leader?
Well, I think, if you look at, obviously, clarifying the objectives is essential, creating a workable plan, thinking about contingencies, thinking about things that could go wrong, that's very important. And of course, the other core skill at the beginning, briefing. Now, briefing is essential because if you can get that right, and you don't have to stand up and be Barack Obama or an actor, you be yourself, be honest, show integrity. But if you can stand up for 10 or 15 minutes and you've got your team together, you outline what is required, you develop a esprit de corps because you've got the team there all hearing it. And also it gives you an opportunity to go around and check with individuals. So in a short space of time, you can do an awful lot of work in briefing. Now, I know in your world, in the military, of course, people are highly trained at this because they have to be. And I always say to my clients, if you ever go to an event laid on by the military, if they're looking for help with, veterans and getting folks back in the world of work and this type of thing, the briefing you hear for 15 minutes, at the end, there will virtually be no questions because you've been told everything you need. That is a real skill, and it's one that's much misunderestimated.
And how important is it that the leader looks the individuals in the eye in that context of briefing?
Yes. I mean, that's the gold standard is, of course, to be able to get your team together and do it. Now, 70% of the economy is service industry, and we have a lot of hybrid working. I have clients where they've closed their offices, everybody works from home. So it adds another layer of complexity in terms of keeping that team cohesion, because you've got people working from home, you've got people perhaps in serviced offices or this type of thing. So yes, it can be done by teams, but I still think at some stage you need to make that effort to get everyone together. There is something about that human connection of people together. Yeah,
the tribal piece of being a human.
Definitely. So if we then think about those other functions, briefing, we've then got things like controlling, supporting, which is making sure things are happening as they should be, making sure the energy is turning the wheels, making sure the team has got the support that it needs. If it's struggling, the leader goes in and helps, deals with things. There's a judgment call there, of course. You can't roll your sleeves up and be the busiest person every day, because you're going to not see the wider picture. You've got to keep your eye on those all three circles. And then, of course, we talk about motivation, which is we'll discuss that in a separate podcast, but that is this whole ability to excite people, to move them from where we are now to where we want to go. It's a key one. Evaluation. And again, this one often makes me smile, because if something goes wrong at work, we have a board of inquiry, don't we? We check it, we look into it. But often if a project has gone well or something has been a success, do we always take the time to analyse why? do we capture those lessons so that we do it next time?
Yeah.
And of course, number 8 on this list is, as we've said, leading by example, which is absolutely critical. And I think a lot of leaders, particularly younger or newer leaders, I should say, will underestimate the power of that. And of course, there are lots of other functions that we can talk about. One I think was very important at the moment is around teaching, so making your people better. Now that of course, we talked there about teaching, coaching, mentoring, and it's about being alive to which is the technique, which are the tools, the levers to pull to help that person.
So we've covered the functions of a leader. The ACL itself, does it have applications at different levels, or is it purely for the coalface from your experience?
I think one of the great beauties of action-centered leadership, it is a framework of functions, so things that leaders have to do, and that runs all the way up through the organisation. I talked about the team leader level. That applies to anyone that's got a team of people. So if you're the chair of the board, you've got a team. That's your chair. Your board. There is then the operational level. Now that's the very interesting part in the middle of an organisation. So if you have a leader who has other leaders who report to them. So let's say, for example, you've got someone who's in charge of 3 or 4 different teams. And there's a team leader or a manager for each one of those, and that person reports in. So that person, if you're the operational leader, you have additional functions to think about. So now all of these will cross over, and they're not specific in one camp, but one of them, for example, will be interpreting. So looking at the strategy and the objectives for the organisation and being crystal clear what it means for your part of the organisation and interpreting that information for your folks. It also talks about things like initiating, so getting things up and moving. And one of the other functions in there is succession planning, where we're talking about, developing individuals, looking, well, who are the next leaders that will be moving forward. We then progress, of course, to the strategic level of leadership, action-centered leadership. This can be the CEO of an organisation, or it can, of course, be a board, let's say for a charity. And their job is to think about the mission, values and purpose of the organisation, do deep planning to make sure that the whole of the organisation is functioning as it should. And there are also some really interesting functions in there. One of my favourite ones is making it happen, which you might think sounds fairly simple, but what it's all about is making sure that across perhaps a bigger organisation, things are happening consistently. We are applying the standards. We have this culture across the organisation to develop people. So as you work up through an organisation, yes, there are levels of complexity, but action-centered leadership in the 3 circles still brings that clarity.
So it stands the test of time, whether you be dealing tactically on the coalface, operationally or strategically, upwards and out.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And I think that's been proved. Okay.
And so if someone wanted to enhance their and professionally develop themselves, how would they get on one of your courses, Trev?
Well, our company Perspective HR, we regularly run open courses, and by that it means that anyone can attend these courses. Generally, they tend to be people from within our client base. We look after 80 organisations, which are generally SMEs, professional services, charities, whole range of different people. And it's an opportunity for people, and it can be the CEO that comes, anyone can come on it, or it can be somebody perhaps ready to start their first leadership role. Because the trick here, of course, is to have the training and have your eyes open before you are plunged into that role. But I do, of course, always make the point at the start of the meeting. One of Professor John Adair's great truisms is that there are 2 words in the English language which are very similar, but actually different. One is study and learn. And you could study every book on leadership going back to Aristotle, spend your life on it, but you only learn leadership when you are given that team of people to deal with. So going into that with the skills is key.
So a glance at your website.
Glance on the website, the dates are there
for everyone.
Absolutely. And a number of our clients over the years, we've gone in and done action-centered leadership courses with the whole of their leadership team. And we'll do follow-up development work with them.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you very much, Trev.
Thank you.
Setting the example, being the best version of yourself, super important. Only last week I suffered from imposter syndrome. And if that new standard is below the standard that's acceptable, then you're not setting a good example.